Heute!
Leland Palmer is an attorney working for Benjamin Horne in the town of Twin Peaks. Leland's story is one of the most important in the entire series. It encompasses tragedy, hatred, comedy, violence, suffering, empathy, madness, and most importantly, confusion about what good and evil really mean. We first meet Leland in the pilot episode when he has to face the terrible events that provide the show's plot. The death of his daughter Laura is one of the most brilliant and realistic moments on television. Leland, his wife, and so many other characters react as they should to these evil events. He cries. Leland spends much of the first season of the show crying, utterly lost in sadness. Too often beforehand, characters and people in the real world and television alike were told to withdraw their pain, pull back their emotions, and especially for men to tough it out. But Leland wails, sobs, and loses all control over himself. It's an amazing and memorable way to begin as a character and important for the history of TV. This was the moment when emotion finally poured forth in front of everyone. For 6 more episodes, Leland crosses over from grief to madness. He loses his composure in public in the first season, dances compulsively, and acts mentally unhinged in front of everyone. He's actually something of a comedy character during this time, dancing absurdly or jumping ludicrously on top of his daughter Laura's coffin. But the amusement walks a beautiful line between funny and uncomfortable. Just like many of Lynch's villains, their behavior walks on a knife edge between humorous and disturbing. In the first season, Leland can make the audience laugh or feel sick inside watching a man collapse into pathetic fits of despair. Showing a parent being utterly destroyed by a tragedy and suffering in real time, day after day, episode after episode, was new for TV. Usually we only see a brief glimpse in a cop show even today during a police interview of the parents. But here we can watch it all happen before us, a man being crushed by how awful everything he's seen is. Leland was totally shattered by his daughter's death, and we got to see how he felt about it.
Have you ever experienced absolute loss?
I doubt if any one of us is a stranger to grief.
No, more than grief. It's deep down, inside. Every cell screams. You can hear nothing else.
The first half of the second season shows Leland supposedly turning over a new leaf. He appears overnight with bright white hair and a bizarrely cheery attitude. But even without the preceding 6 episodes of misery and madness, there's something wrong about his new persona. He seems to have entirely shifted personalities, like another person was in charge of him somehow. We also know at the close of Season 1 that Leland murdered a helpless Jacques Renault. There's a twisted look of pain and grief on his face. It's an amazing feat of actor Ray Wise and betrays something unreadable about Leland at the time. He could be a normal man in a paroxysm of grief and anger, willing to do something that would have been unthinkable a week before, or an enraged father desperate for revenge, or a mixture of misery and anger like he's being forced by outside hands to do something he doesn't want to do. That expression is amazing. He seems totally unwilling to be doing what he's doing, yet he's doing it for some reason. This new white-haired Leland feels like the manic end of a manic-depressive swing. He's too perky, too happy, and too willing to be normal again. It's an exaggeration of normalcy, like he was an exaggeration of grief in the first season. How and why is he acting in this strange way? We get that answer in undoubtedly the greatest reveal in TV history. In episode 14, we get the horrifying answer to the question that fascinated America. Who killed Laura Palmer? Her father. Laura's own father brutally beat and bashed in the head of his 18-year-old child, and that was after raping her for years. This reveal episode is probably the very best in all of Twin Peaks. Directed by David Lynch, it draws together all the things of the show into a beautiful nightmare. Supernatural elements, inexplicable to us or the town's residents, haunt the episode like ghosts. The entire town can feel something in the air when Maddie Ferguson dies. Like a ripple in the force cries out to everyone. From Agent Cooper to the log lady to sweet and innocent James Hurley to mean and criminal Bobby Briggs. Tears flow again, and this was so unusual at the time I have to mention it. To see characters overawed by emotion and succumb to complete sadness while angelic music of Julie Cruz plays in the background is stunning. And all of this is juxtaposed with the grimmest violence seen on TV up to that point, maybe seen ever. Leland mercilessly beats his niece, smashing her face again and again. There's nothing pulled about this. There's nothing fantasy-oriented, nothing fantastic or ridiculous. This is real-life horrible violence and how gritty and terrible it really is in the real world. Leering over her and kissing her, torturing her by stabbing underneath her fingernail with a knife. It's still difficult to watch this scene and not wince even after 25 years. It's a triumph for the show that helped prove that television was an art form and could compete with movies for artistic gravitas. Over the next 2 episodes, Leland is completely possessed by Bob the demon creature that Maddie Ferguson and Sarah Palmer saw in visions. They may have briefly seen Leland for what he really was in their home without realizing it at the time. Bob refers to Leland as his vehicle, a puppet he can ride and control whenever he wants. He was used as a way for these spiritual entities to experience carnal desire, murder, rape, and violence. Bob fed off them and fed off of Leland for decades until Agent Cooper finally caught up with him. In episode 16, Leland is finally trapped and cornered at a cell. Leland or Bob, whoever it is, acts deranged and knows things about Cooper's past Leland couldn't possibly know. Eventually, without revealing too much, Bob smashes Leland's head against the prison door, killing him. In another magnificent scene, Leland is evacuated by the fleeing Bob and is forced to come to terms with everything he's done. He reveals that they made him kill Teresa Banks and Laura. He claims not to remember what was happening to him and blacked out during these times. Leland's story begins almost 40 years before the start of Twin Peaks. When he was a small boy, his family would go up to a summer cabin on Pearl Lakes. There he met a man, or something that looked like a man. It was some sort of creature from the depths of the Black Lodge searching for hosts.
I was just a boy. I saw him in my dream. He said he wanted to play. He opened me, and I invited him, and he came inside me.
He went inside?
When he was inside, I didn't know. And when he was gone, I couldn't remember. He made me do things. Terrible things. He said he wanted lives. He wanted others that they could use like they used me.
We get the ugly truth of what happened to Leland as a small boy. Like many abusers, he started out as a victim. He continued the golden circle, the unbroken cycle of abuse. In some ways, Leland's growth was arrested right at that moment. A brutal event created a schism within him. On one side was the good, friendly man, an upstanding citizen and town darling. On the other was a wild man, a beast with long, scraggly gray hair that was nothing but unhinged appetite. Leland grew into a well-respected person. A lawyer with a large house, an upper-middle-class life, a loving wife, and beautiful daughter. He was a pillar of the community, just like the Palmer family had been for generations. But much of it was a lie. Leland was infested for most of his life by the demon creature and forced to commit terrible acts. Sometimes in early adolescence, Leland began sexually assaulting his own daughter. The abuse continued for years until he finally killed her and dumped her body in an abandoned train car in the woods. Why exactly all of this was done is one of the greatest mysteries of the show. Was Leland responsible for his acts, or was he a puppet for darker forces? David Lynch brilliantly decided to forever muddy the waters of the show by including this line in the series finale.
I didn't kill anybody.
That moment, more than any other, frustrated and excited Twin Peaks fans. A grinning, leering Leland Palmer, seen for the first time since episode 16, taunts Cooper. Dale had previously asserted firmly that Leland was not responsible for his acts, and it was Bob that forced him to do it. But Bob himself describes Leland as...
Does Leland know what you've done?
Leland's a babe in the woods, with a large hole where his conscience used to be.
That seems to imply that Leland's moral compass was gradually eroded or turned into Swiss cheese over time. Maybe it's more complicated than simply a puppeteer controlling his puppet. Like Bob was goading him to be giving in to his more animal instinct all the time, slowly making it seem okay to be more and more wicked. Did Leland, whatever that meant, have a say in what was going on at all? Or did he black out and completely forget everything? It's one of the great unanswered questions of the show, taunting us to this day. Bob also curiously mentions Leland as a babe in the woods here. A strange line, somewhat recalling Leland's first interaction with Bob as a small child. Leland says something very strangely in a weird childlike way when speaking to Senior Droolcock.
I know that gum. I used to chew it when I was a kid. That's my most favorite gum in the world.
It's like Leland is suddenly a small boy, like he never grew up and is faced with a scary world he couldn't and doesn't understand. How much did Bob arrest Leland's development? It's almost like the concept of an abuse victim's emotional development being stopped at the time of his abuse and never properly developing is shown as a physical act of an older man infesting and controlling the soul from that point onward. The childish, innocent Leland was abused and attacked when he couldn't possibly fight back what remained somehow in Leland's mind, somewhere in there. a small, immature boy, unable to see what was going on. The Leland we see in the Fire Walk with Me movie is great. He storms and rages across his household like a domestic tyrant, drugging his wife, terrorizing his daughter, screaming at her, forcing his will on both of them, uncomfortably talking about sex in front of his daughter, implying her impurity by demanding she clean herself before dinner.
You didn't wash your hands before you sat down to dinner, did you? Let me see.
Dad.
Oh, these hands are filthy. Look. There's dirt way under this fingernail.
Leland, what are you doing?
Look at this finger here.
Leland?
Laura did not wash her hands before dinner.
I don't know if David Lynch or Mark Frost has ever seen this movie, but it reminded me of the film Bigger Than Life. It was made in 1956 and encapsulates a kind of scary 1950s world of hermetically sealed domestic terrorism. James Mason stars as a man addicted to prescription medication who becomes a rage-fueled maniac around his wife and kids.
Our marriage is over. In my mind, I've divorced you. You're not my wife any longer. I'm not your husband any longer.
Leland Palmer is the ultimate rejection of that world, even more so than Blue Velvet, which at least shows a beautiful, perfect world corrupted by an outside evil. In Twin Peaks, the very heart of the 50s dream, the suburban home, is the source of the darkness, the place where all the cruelty and paternal dictatorship stems from. I recommend the movie to anyone interested in that kind of hermetically sealed 50s world turned to hell kind of story. Leland Palmer remains one of the absolute best things about Twin Peaks. Ray Wise does a brilliant job and turns in what is likely the best performance on the entire show. His naked emotions of grief and anger are incredible. He managed to play a villain, a weirdo, a victim, and an enigma all at once, and deserves special mention for the incredible job going through all of these different emotional states throughout the series. Without his performance, there really wouldn't be a Twin Peaks. Leland as a character remains to this day an enigma. It's easy to come to conclusions about him, but hard to make any of them stick. Was he possessed by Bob throughout the entire series? If he was, why did Leland give Agent Cooper vital information about Bob's origin and how to catch him in Episode 10? How often did Bob take control, and was Leland totally out of control at these times, or was that a ruse to make himself look or feel a little better? Maybe he did have some say in what was going on. That last moment continues to haunt me from the series finale. But for the most part, my personal interpretation of Leland is of a victim. Someone who was attacked when he was young, even younger than Laura was when she was first attacked, and someone who gave in to Bob. I always imagined Leland was maybe 7 or 8 when this happened, rather than being 12 or 13 like Laura was. The reason Laura died was because she was given a choice. Let Bob control you or be destroyed. She was strong and fought him off. Leland didn't have the strength or the understanding to resist and allowed Bob to possess him. There's a moment in Fire Walk with Me when Leland is suddenly overcome with a feeling of remorse. He'd just been horrible to both his daughter and wife, and he briefly realizes how terrible he's being, how wretched he's making his family. Leland also asked not to be forced to do this just before killing Laura in Fire Walk with Me. Maybe it's slightly more complicated than this, but I think that Leland did not really have control over himself, and was being compelled by evil to hurt, to rape, to kill, and to be hideous to others. And amazingly, the show provides him with a touching and beautiful moment when he dies. Just before death, Leland is assaulted one last time by Bob. This time, however, it's the tremendous agony of recognizing all at once all the hideous things he's done. Bob cruelly forces him to know everything that went on in secret that Leland could only guess at from a distance. Leland was a victim. How much of a victim is open to interpretation, but for me he was a brutally misused boy, and twisted into an unholy vessel for something evil, used and discarded like an object by something that didn't see him as anything but a resource to drain and throw away. Endless appetite and hunger. At the end, though, with Agent Cooper's coaxing, Leland actually has a beautiful moment where he sees Laura. He sees her, maybe as he's going to the afterlife, and it's kind of a beautiful moment to have this dark, tragic character story come to an end in that way. It's a beautiful mixture of darkness, horror, and, yes, sadness. It's a sad moment when he sees his daughter and realizes he's going to die and how miserable he's made everyone in his life, or how miserable he's been because of Bob. And it's a wonderful moment to see and a great moment to end on.
Oh, God, have mercy on me. What have I done? What have I done? Oh, God, I love her. I loved her with all my heart.
Look to the light, Leland. Find the light.
I see it.
Into the light, Leland. Into the light.
I see her. She's there.
Into the light, Leland.
She's beautiful.
Into the light.
Laura.
Don't be afraid.